Hello, Soul Tribe, and welcome to David Berry 75's channel. I'm your guest reader, Toni, and if you'd like to guest read, please contact David via his email, or you can drop him a direct message in Discord, and if you're really brave, you could just hunt him down on Wayne's channel during live chat. Just kidding. Okay, alright, so we're doing something different because, variety is the spice of life. So let's move on to chapter 6, The Illusion of Freedom. One of the most powerful illusions of Homo sapiens is that of free will, as an argument against what has been stated in the previous pages. It could be said that, come what may, the individual does as he pleases, and that this freedom really proves he is not under control of any kind of forces outside himself. Precisely, one of the things that gives sapiens a sensation of power is the illusion of freedom. To prove this freedom, the adolescent rebels against the rules of behavior imposed by society, believing that he is proving his independence, when he really is when really the only thing he accomplishes is submission to his own unconscious impulses. Freedom has many aspects, and we speak therefore of private or personal freedom, public freedom, social freedom, freedom of action, words and ideas, moral freedom, and economic freedom. In everyday life, we speak of economic slavery, of the emancipation of women, of oppression of the lower class by the upper class, of subjugation of fear and anguish, dependence on higher authorities, subordination of youth in a world created by the elders, and many other concepts which would be too lengthy to enumerate. We are not interested in fashioning an orthodox philosophical analysis, dwelling on what has been said by so many thinkers in the past. Instead, we wish to reflect upon the vital reality of sapiens. Sapiens believes in his personal independence due to the fact that at any moment he may, if he so desires, violently break any of the bonds which imprison him without any impediments. It is possible for him, if he so desires, to leave the work which imprisons him and live as a vagabond on other people's charity. Or he can abandon those studies which are so arduous and look for a job or live as he can. If he undertakes any of these measures of freedom, he knows he will have to pay for them, but considers the price cheap for doing as he pleases. The best proof of his apparent independence can be inferred by the reader, who imagines that at any time he can, by a voluntary act, quit reading this book once and for all. All these reflections suggest the possession of a force we can call power for doing things, something of which sapiens feel extremely proud. Consciousness, intelligence, willpower, and freedom constitutes the mythological quaternary of human race, which considers these talents as equal to the holy teaching that designates them as human beings. Not for a moment do people have any doubt that they really are the possessors of these gifts. In order to duly illustrate this chapter on freedom, we will form a tyranny of the words freedom, willpower, and desire, as these are intimately related to the subject of our interest. Before continuing, it is necessary to clarify the objective of this work. In its attempt to enlighten in a clear and open manner, it could rightly be called anti-hermetic. It was written for those who aspire to accomplish something in a real and effective way on the path of their own spiritual development. For those goals to be realized, it is vital. It is important that the individual should know in depth his true internal nature and his real position on the vital scales of value, to the degree that sapiens, in full of illusions about himself and his life, his spiritual fulfillment becomes impossible, becoming only the beautiful dream of a well-meaning person. The world is full of mirages of this nature, which ends up being nothing more than devices used by people to avoid the reality that troubles him. There is no field more likely than esotericism to generate all kinds of fantasies by intellects anxious to avoid crude reality. In facing reality, there is the great advantage of that the individual must suffer all kinds of sacrifices and make effort in order to attain his purpose. And this is a certainly arduous and difficult. It is much easier for the loafer to stay dreaming without making any effort or taking a risk of any kind, because in dreams everything is possible and there is no danger of facing arduous, conflicting, or traumatic situations. For those people, occultism is the real open sesame, which enables them to drug themselves with the illusion of perfection and spiritual progress, which only exists in their imaginations, stimulated by unconscious desires and fears. Generally, the seeker of esoteric doctrines only wishes to find an ideology system which justifies his own defects and stimulates his hidden dream. Although this system may be absurd and patently subjective or childish, we can assert that sapiens only understand what he wishes to understand, or more accurately, that which is convenient. He absolutely discredits everything that affronts his cerebral guidelines or his habits of life and conduct. This is perhaps one of the greatest obstacles facing the student of Hermeticism, or the neophyte who aspires to be a disciple. To analyze objectively and without prejudice requires a flexible and open disposition, so as to not to limit oneself and discredit what is being studied without a prior alert and deep reflective process. Still, however, much as individual strives, he will not be successful if he has too high opinion of himself or his own intelligence and knowledge. It is sufficient for someone to believe he is very intelligent, cultured, or wise to refrain from thinking impartially, limiting himself to a superficial examination of concepts, and very frequently taking from these only the emotional or symbolic content. Vanity and pride are two bandages which blind sapiens, preventing him from seeing what would be evident to an awkward, impartial, or impersonal observer. Symbolically, we could visualize sapiens as a personage who has inflated himself, and this condition impels him to float in the air towards higher regions, but only in relations to the distance from the ground. From the clouds, he contemplates the world and believes himself to be the most wise and perfect being in creation. Unfortunately, while he remains in this limbo, he will also be far removed from vital and everyday reality. The first step taken by the student of Hermeticism or of esotericism is to really put his feet on the ground and proceed, despite the pain, with his own deflation until he reaches his real level. He will hopefully reach the lowest point possible, as there is no other starting point except from zero. If one has not started from zero, it is a false start and therefore corrupt. The student must live the experience of entirely understanding his own insignificance and incredible smallness in face of the immensity of the universe. As we have already stated in previous pages, the individual must appreciate the magnitude of his ignorance, as only the immense humility caused by this experience can lead the individual, along with powerful reasoning and adequate alertness, to the psychological conditions which are necessary for him to understand the Hermeticism is and the far-reaching truth involved. If this state of humility has not been reached and there is still pride and strong self-esteem together with a destructive internal nature, it is improbable that an individual will ever gain any spiritual benefit from Hermetic science. It is for this reason that we are endeavoring in this book to have the individual see himself as he really is and not as he believes himself to be. The student must not accept these concepts with the blind faith of a believer or a convert. On the contrary, such concepts must be shaken countless times in the sheath of serene and unprejudiced meditation during a state of intensified alertness. Afterwards, one must not be content with this procedure, but prove that teaching is everyday life, observing his own experience and that of others. In the practice and study of Hermeticism, there is a necessary order which must be complied with the student to reach his goals. Regarding this process, we urge the reader to make the greatest effort to understand this book. There are 3 basic stages to be fulfilled in order to be successful. The first one is motivation, the second one is understanding, and the third one is practice. The result is evolution. There are 3 indispensable steps for the student to attain his goal. His motivation must be powerful, his understanding deep, and his practice intense. The result of all this is the evolution of the student. Yet, what at first sight seems so simple is arduous and complex to accomplish. The student generally fails at one of the stages and evolution does not take place. Many times the student reaches the following result. 1, motivation. 2, they kind of just skip it. 3, practice. And the result is stimulation of mass energy, and there is no evolution. In this case, the individual is carried away by his enthusiasm and skips over the second point, directly proceeding to practice. It is also possible, and this is very common, that his own inability to understand impels him to evade this stage. The result will then be a stimulation of mass energy. That is a corporeal euphoria, but without the desired results, evolution. We must realize the fundamental importance of profound understanding on the path of Hermeticism, as this is not a footpath or of faith and self-conviction. Without authentic understanding, nothing real is gained, only subjective illusions. Frequently, the following situation occurs. First is, again, motivation. and the motivation is poor. The second, again, is understanding, and this is usually insufficient in this occurrence. And the third one, practice, is scant, so they're just not practicing or much. The result is insignificant evolution. Occasionally, a person's understanding and practice reaches acceptable levels, but motivation is deficient. In this case, the individual lacks the fuel necessary to successfully reach his spiritual goal. Having understood this, let us analyze the triangle of the words freedom, willpower, and desire. In the first place, sapiens is ambivalent in relation to freedom. His desires and fears it simultaneously. Generally, he desires it physically and fears it psychologically. Sapiens want his physical and political and economic freedom, and he desires total freedom of action to accomplish his personal aims. In the end, the longing represents an immeasurable yearning for power. In this, he wishes to be free enough to be able to exercise his power over people, and with the environment following his desire for freedom, his endeavors by all means within his reach to attain physical, ideological, and economic independence. In opposition to this, however, and obeying his ancestral fear of individual responsibility, he merges into religious, cultural, and political systems within which he dissolves his own I, thus becoming free from the responsibility of his own decisions and actions. From another point of view, freedom is understood as a lack of opposition to individual actions or tendencies, thus making it possible for the individual to accomplish his purposes. Whatever these may be, it is for this reason that many individuals seek the freedom by means of successful economic negotiations, alleging that money makes them free and powerful. Yet, Sapiens' approach leaves out one truly important consideration in this aspect, a factor which in practice acts as a veritable jailer, and at times as the executioner of the individual. We refer to the internal nature of man, to his emotions, instincts, and passions, which are really his masters. The only possible freedom in this life is freedom from one's own passions, because as long as they dominate us, we will be mere puppets who obey the ebb and flow of the passionate state of the masses. All independence is impossible while thinking and feeling according to the influence of the environment on our internal nature. Whatever experience of freedom we may have will disappear in the face of the primitive force of our animal soul, which dominates us. Freedom does not depend on the individual's physical conditions. The prisoner is his cell and can be autonomous than a person who is very rich and his freedom of movement. The only true freedom is liberation of oneself and liberation from the central computer of the species. As long as this has not taken place, it is possible to be a great politician, a famous multi-millionaire, having glory, honor, and power, but still be as much or more of a slave than the poorest man. We invite the austere reader to analyze himself and establish what decisions he has made absolutely freely in his life, without being compelled by either external or internal pressures which oblige him to act in a certain way, or not solely because he has no other alternative, or not merely following the line of least resistance. Of course, these are not decisions made freely, independently, and voluntarily. but are instead equivalent to things which happen to be the individual independently of his wishes. From this time, we reach the age when we can make decisions. It has been noted that one decides to follow a certain career through imitation, qualification, and ambition. One marries due to loneliness, sexual desire, lack of love, or personal convenience, but not free will. To choose freely implies a decision independent from internal and external pressures, behaving impartially and objectively, careful weighing the pros and cons, then deciding what it is we really want and to what extent this may be favorable or harmful, and what degree of compatibility there is between our plan and family and social interest. We have now arrived at the second word of our triangle, willpower, which is ultimately the key that would shed more light on the problem under discussion. The capacity to choose and make decisions involves the possession of mature judgment manifested through willpower, and this quality must be central to our lives. To be free, we must be capable of voluntarily deciding our existence. Nevertheless, it is here that willpower is confused with desire. And the third word of our triangle, it is necessary to recognize that the human being does not move by the impulse of his willpower, but by the strength of his desire, which is in turn motivated and conceived by prevailing instincts of emotion. To have willpower implies the possession of a powerful, stable, and mature superior I. The will permits maintaining a constant line of action, which does not occur in practice, as the individual constantly changes his center of gravity or his directing eye. As Gurdjieff so aptly states, man has no eye, but many eyes, which in reality possesses him instinctively and anarchically in a passionate manner. For this reason, Sapiens rapidly changes his mind as well as his way of thinking and feeling. From this is born a numerous internal contradictions, disorientation, doubt, and instability. What stability can be if we change every minute? As Sapiens unconsciously realized this phenomenon, he creates the most rigid intellectual plans possible in order to cling to them, thus obtaining the semblance of stability. It does not matter that the directing I is acting as the master of or our biological house, the physical house. The intellectual plan will tell us what we must do. This is one of the reasons why Sapiens petrifies his intelligence, limiting himself to an assembly of fixed, stable, and permanent circuits. This has some advantages, but they are insignificant in the face of the negative factors this implies. It may be true that petrification is useful to the individual in attaining greater emotional or intellectual stability or adjustments to the group to which he belongs. On the other hand, petrification converts the individual, metaphorically speaking, into a tree of stone, rigid, inflexible, and static, depriving him of dynamics of transformation. While the world changes, the individual clings to his worn-out plan, refusing to consider the importance and far-reaching effects of these transformations. Without a grown-up and mature super I, Man has no real will. The force of the unknown and unexpected impels him towards a completely unknown goal, which was not chosen by him. Sapiens is an eternal wanderer toward the unknown and completely ignores the happiness or tragedy of his future. A premonition of this impels him to enjoy life in a compulsive manner, systematically searching for today's pleasure as he is unsure about tomorrow. He is being without a future. He's a being without a future, at least in his choice. Under these conditions, the materialistic and purely selfish attitude of sapiens is, to a certain extent, understood and forgiven. Sapiens tries by all means within his reach to make his empty and inert internal world vibrate. In this pursuit, he often prefers useless suffering in internal places. Lacking a superior I, sapiens tenaciously take refuge in a collective I, which is projected into the individual directing his life. In previous chapters, we have referred to this I as the collective soul, or central computer of the species. It is thus that custom, norms, and the collective approval of rejection of certain guidelines for conduct masters the individual and in the end alienates him completely. All men who seem to have an original and successful attitude towards life are rapidly imitated by the masses who, without further thought, superficially adopt their ways without looking beneath the surface. Movie stars and singers bring about an imitative mania as they project a grand image, while the gray man endeavors to possess that image in order to become outstanding. There are very few people who act authentically, follow their own internal impulses, appearing as they really are. The majority constantly seek the approval of others to justify and reinforce their way of being. A characteristic custom of nearly everyone is to frequently observe the facial expressions of people with whom they come into contact in order to verify whether their faces show approval or rejection, and to modify their attitude accordingly. The masses in turn constantly seek to follow. This is the real recognition of the fact that their volitions is void. They need someone to follow as they lack the willpower to direct themselves. The leader is always a symbol of the man who is strong, daring, free, and has the determination which is lacking in the common man. We definitely deny the concept of sapiens' free will and maintain that in truth and according to the Oriental concepts, all is written. Sapiens occupies a specific level within the cosmic order, and for him all is predetermined and foreseen. Nevertheless, we must not take this concept in an absolute, blind, and definitive manner. It is indispensable to interpret the concept in the sense that a person is limited to the possibilities offered by the lords of destiny or zodiacal gods. However, these beings do not imply the individual, do not impel the individual along a one-way path, but instead there are detours on the path which present a choice, but always within the structure imposed on him. Though it may be true that the sapiens all is written, this is not true for the wise man who has freed himself from the collective animal soul and has been converted into a stellar man. For this individual, nothing is written, and he has in his hands the book of destiny and the pen with which he may write as he pleases, but always within the laws that govern the universe. Sapiens cannot direct his life to whatever he really wants. He has to limit himself to being carried away on the ocean of collective progress, which ebb and flow is determined by the Lord of Destiny. So the great civilizations are born through much blood, sweat, and tears. Just so one day the pendulum will swing to the other extreme and rapidly destroy everything, leaving only ruins, traces, and memories. The pendulum of life crushes and overwhelms human creations. No matter how powerful and important, they are scattered to the wind with the passing of time, thus removing any transcendence they may have had. Only the immortal of God survive the terrible Chronos. All right, you guys, that ends chapter 6, The Illusion of Freedom. And we'll pick up with chapter 8, Hermeticism. And again, if you'd like to volunteer or guest read on David's channel, contact him via email, or like I said, drop him a note in Discord chat area or in his direct messages, or hunt him down. All right, well, I hope you guys have a favorable and beautiful day. Love y'all. And until next time, I will see you later. Peace.